Welcome to the Octopus Movement and our podcast, where we celebrate the unique minds and extraordinary potential of nonlinear learners and thinkers. I'm your host for today, Dr. Janice Campbell, and we'll be exploring how the power of nonlinear thinking can transform the world. Now I'd like to introduce our wonderful guest, Karen Zeigler, a leader in design thinking. She uses her nonlinear approach to help leaders across industries solve the unsolvable, including acting as chief of staff for the Octopus Movement. No small gig. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you so much, Janice. It's a pleasure to be here. I can't wait to roast Perry in this interview.
Yes. We had a little pre-show repartee. So I'm curious, how does nonlinear thinking play out in your life?
Wow. Well, I guess probably the most direct way that it plays out, and you've already alluded to it, is design thinking. You know, design thinking in and of itself is a nonlinear process. And so I think that's part of the reason I was drawn to it, part of the reason I innately think in that regard. But I use it in a way that is also very nonlinear. You know, if you look up design thinking, most people will see, product design, service design. It's starting to trickle into the organizational and cultural design. But I really love using design thinking to help leaders. And that's part of the reason why I partner with Perry, is to use design thinking to help design their vision. So how do you begin to pull all these pieces together that make up this image of your vision with the talent and the people that you have on your team? And so that's how I use nonlinearity, but it really does trickle throughout all my life, as you could tell from our pre-conversation.
Yes. And I had a design teacher in undergrad who used to say the biggest design you'll ever make is your life.
Yes, and yes.
It really changed the way I looked at, everything that I was doing, and helped me crawl even further out of the box. What experiences do you have? Oh, go ahead. Shoot.
Well, I was just going to say that actually has become a course. One of the leading design teachers at Stanford in the D school there has a book out called Design Your Life, and it's all based on design thinking, and he applies the principles to your life. And I've certainly done that with my own life, and perhaps a few other people that may or may not have asked for it. But yes, I do ascribe to designing your life.
Yeah, talking about people that may or may not have asked for it. It's once you get out of the box, it's a little hard to crawl back in on a momentary basis.
Yes, it is.
How do I want to ask this question? Is there an experience that you've had, either personally or professionally, where your nonlinear approach to things caused a big breakthrough or a major impact for yourself or other people?
Oh, absolutely. And I think probably my approach was more the reason for the breakthrough than perhaps, my thoughts on the matter, because I like to use what's in design thinking known as empathy, which is the first phase, and that is ask questions. And so, when someone is dealing with something, rather than, tell them what's coming through my nonlinear brain, which can really sound all over the place and may not make sense, especially if they're very linear, I just begin to ask questions. I know where I'm going, but they may or may not know where I'm going yet. But in the diving into that questions and helping them even understand themselves, what it is they want, where it is they want to go, that's caused quite a few breakthroughs, I think.
Do you have a specific example that you can share with us? Anything come to mind? I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Well, this conversation I'm having with Perry after the podcast comes to mind, but I can't divulge that one. But no, I've been a coach and a consultant for a long time, so it's quite a pretty common occurrence, I would say. So yeah, I'm too nervous, as Perry would tell you, to tell you one specific. You put me on the spot here.
Sorry. So the way I think about it is that I'm always about creating more community and oneness than I am about oppositional thinking. And I tend to think of the linear, nonlinear conversation as being a spectrum, just like anything else. And I mean, as I like to say, have you ever met a linear 2-year-old? We all start out of the box, right? And then we either crawl into them for comfort or necessity, and then wonder how we got there. How do you see that conversation?
Well, I see it a little bit differently. And I was actually having this conversation in my head this morning. I was thinking about, and I think in images often. So I was thinking about the image of quantum computing. I don't know if you've seen any of the images of quantum computing, but basically you have this dot of a starting point, and then quantum computing will give you all the solutions, all the lines to the solution. So there's all these lines. Instead of just one linear line, there's dozens. But for me, even though there's dozens of lines, it's very linear still. So if you're looking at that image of a quantum computing, to me, nonlinear would be all the space in between all the lines.
I like that.
Which is other possibilities, right?
Right.
Beyond what is obvious to even the quantum computer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you and I also, while we're running with analogies, you and I also had a conversation about how I think I mentioned wanting, any organization I do, any structural stuff that I've done in my various careers has been to create a smooth marble run, to be able to put the marble at the top and come back at dinner and have it, go have fun, have lunch, do whatever I want to do, come back and find the marble at the bottom. I don't really care about the path that it takes to get there. Is the work that you do you help people set up the marble run, or do you lead them to set up? I mean, how is that pairing of the sort of linearity of the marble run and the wild ride of the marble?
Well, ultimately the marble run is linear, right? It's the most efficient path from A to B. Right. But today's leaders, because they are so focused in a linear mode, they think that the fastest marble run from A to B has to be technology, right? Because technology is efficient in that way. Right. However, our businesses, no matter how much AI takes over the world, is more than just the systems we use, right? It's people. And so you have to take into account not only the systems you're going to use, but also the people involved. And that's where effectiveness comes in. So, what may look like, if you're only looking at systems, the most efficient run is from A to B. When you put people in the mix, for it to be effective, it may go A to C to D to, the end. So you really have to have a nonlinear approach, almost even more so than if you were just doing something that was totally system related, which I can not think of a single thing that a human doesn't touch. So, but it's the two together. It's never one or the other.
Right. It's almost like the container the container needs to be big enough to allow for all the human movement that can possibly happen inside.
Yeah. And you have to account for that. It's not just how does the system operate? How are the humans operating the systems or interacting with the systems going to operate? Right. And often, I think it was Gartner who put out some research that said, I'm probably misquoting it, but you could ask ChatGPT, they'll tell you. There's research out there, and the amount of money that is wasted in workarounds by employees is in the billions. It's like 3 hours a day. Employees waste time making workarounds for the systems that they were given that was supposed to make them more efficient. So that's the problem in a nutshell, right? Everyone thinks they're being efficient because they have the latest technology or this or that, but they've left out the human element, which quite frankly, I believe, as you do, that we're born nonlinear. So they leave out that element, and then they wonder why, people are taking longer to get their jobs done or quitting because they're sick of doing it in a stupid way. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I think that also then speaks to the conversation of hierarchy versus communal planning and communal thinking. I mean, having somebody who's the point person is often very useful, but having it dictated top down often can squelch the humanity out of something.
Absolutely. And I call that, in the work that I do, kind of creating the fence around the playground. The leader is there to say, okay, here's the fence around the playground. We got, X budgets. Maybe we got some systems constraints because we don't have millions to update our systems. Here are the things, the constraints. But inside these constraints, which is where the best creativity happens, is all your people, and they know how to make it happen. And right. So it's just helping leaders develop those skills to see how that works and to experiment with how that works and to begin to trust it, because, there's not enough trust for most people, especially if you lean linear, in that nonlinear aspect, and they can't see the path where it's going or how it's going to work out. So they kind of pull back in fear a lot often.
That makes me think of a word that's been being bantered about in our circles recently of coddy wobbling.
Oh, God.
Going with intention. Yeah, going with intention towards an unknown destination, or an unclear destination. I like that.
Yeah.
And
I have a video on my YouTube channel about walking your bunnies. And I actually had the strangest encounter one day on a nature hike where a lady was out walking a bunny on a leash. And it turned into this video, which was tips for how do you manage creatives, because they're definitely, we are not dogs that say, you're going from A to B, right? Mm-hmm. We're bunnies. And so you have to learn how to walk your bunny. And it's helpful if you know how to do that when you're dealing with creatives, which is the future of work, because AI is going to take more and more of the linear away from us, which is a good thing.
I love that bunny analogy. I actually had a friend who would take her cats outside. They were indoor cats, but she would take them outside in her yard and attach them to opposite ends of the same leash, because they would never leave the yard because they could never agree about where to go. But they still got to wander around and do stuff, but they had to kind of work together to get there. So yeah, similar concept.
Yes, except bunnies are known as the symbol for creativity because how they multiply, right? Yeah. And that's what we want in our organizations, is the innovation, the creativity. We want to multiply our organization, and people are going about it the wrong way.
Well, or just the not fun way, really, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of the playground, how do you see this all playing out into the Octopus Movement's concept of the human mycelium?
Yeah. Well, every organization has its own human mycelium, but they don't recognize that it's there, and they certainly don't leverage it in any way. In fact, oftentimes they ignore it. But humans are connected, right? And just the simple example of talking about employees and their workarounds for 3 hours a day. What happens when a new person, comes into your organization? Well, you've set them with an existing person, or maybe 3 or 4 existing people, and they talk about how the work is done. But then on the side, they go, but this is how it really gets done, right? That's the human mycelium at work, because those people are there. They're already doing it. They're already connecting. They're already being successful on a certain level. And that's what the mycelium does. It goes to help different spots in nature to thrive. And so we do that already, but organizations just aren't tapped into the fact that it exists. And if they do, they see it as maybe a gossip chain or something that's negative, right? Rather than something that actually helps their organization thrive in many ways.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if you take the mycelium analogy to its next step, what they're doing is they're taking the stuff that doesn't work anymore, is not useful anymore, and composting it and turning it into something else that's rich. And so inevitably workers, or anybody in a job will be like, it'd be better if we did that, or if we move the copy machine over here, it would make the everything flow better, or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
And listening to those.
One of my first jobs was in banking, and when I got into my first office, I was green, but I was talking to all the employees. And you go into a bank, there's a teller line, and then there's the service reps. Well, the service reps, the hierarchy is the service reps are better than the tellers, right? But the tellers are the ones that have the lines out the door with customers. Well, the copier was next to the service reps because, they deserve it. They're higher up. Well, when I came in and I started talking to everyone and talking about how we could improve and make things better, the tellers were like, well, we really need a copier back here because we have to, they had to go through like 3 locked doors and get over to the service area, make their copy, and all the while the customer line's just growing. I'm like, well, that's easy. We move the copier to behind the teller line. And so I look like a genius to, the staff at that point, but it was really just a matter of, what's going to work better for people.
And sometimes it's the blatantly obvious, right? It's like, well, then move the copier where it's used more. Wouldn't that make life easier for everybody? So
absolutely. Day one, I'm a hero, and all I've done is move the copy machine. It's amazing.
No, I actually am thinking about a person I worked with at one point who was had been a counselor in a school, and she was having there was a couple of kids that she was really trying to help, and she was trying to figure out what was going on because they weren't telling her everything of what was going on. And she happened to be walking through the cafeteria later in the day with one of them, and the kid left and went home, and one of the cafeteria workers said, "Oh, how's has their dad gotten out of jail yet?" And she said, "Oh, I didn't know that was a thing." And the cafeteria was like, "Oh yeah. She talks to me about it all the time." And they ended up having a conversation, and all this information, all this valuable information was happening in the cafeteria, with this cafeteria worker that
the human mycelium of the school, right?
Absolutely. And so sometimes information or wisdom or the brilliance of moving the copier has occurred to somebody whose job it doesn't belong. It's not officially their job. And how much more could get done if we all talk to each other? A novel idea.
And it really is about listening, right? Listening to everyone and their perspective, what they feel, because there's not a soul that shows up to any business on a daily basis to work, whether it's online or offline, that doesn't want to succeed, right? And these obstacles are not only causing less success in the organization, they're also causing them to be less successful. Like, no one signs up to, let me waste 3 hours of my day to go do workarounds, right?
I want to do that.
I want to do it, right? So, but it seems common sense and comical to talk about, but it happens every single day in companies across the country and the globe even. The pandemic, I think, has brought much more of this to light, but it's evident by people quitting their jobs, the rate of retention, that it really hasn't moved the needle as much as it should have.
Yeah, no, that has definitely been and I think the quarantine helped people suddenly go, wait a minute, I'm in a box. When did that happen? So
it was interesting. They were in a box, but they were free at the same time, right?
Exactly.
Freer than they've ever been.
Right. They were in their physical home box, suddenly realizing that they were in a box other places. Yeah. Very interesting. Choose your box wisely. So solving the unsolvable has been your mission for a long time, and now you've gone in whole hog with the Octopus Movement, attempting
what was I thinking?
We love having you here. And I'm wondering how when we think about solving the unsolvable, a lot of people think about issues globally, like the environment and education and politics and health equity, and the list goes on and on and on. Racism, obviously, otherism of any kind. How do you see nonlinear thinking helping to solve the unsolvable?
Well, one, it's going to bring about appreciation for all of humanity, right? And I give this example. If you didn't tune into Namrata's interview on the Octopus Movement Podcast, it was, I think, last Friday. It was a great interview. But one of the things that stood out to me was she was talking about how she was working with all these NASA scientists and all this stuff that you would go, wow, brilliance. I can't compete. I'm not smart enough, all these things. And then she talks about not being able to handle the remote at home, right? So we all have this area in our lives where we look totally clueless, totally like, for me, it's a dumb blonde. But then we also have this area of our life where we're just brilliant. And for me, it is, I'm geographically challenged. Back when there were malls, I would go to the mall, I'd walk in a store, I'd come out of the store, I would not know what direction to go in. I'm like, I'm totally lost. If we had more time, I'd tell you of a time I went to see an investment client. He had like millions and millions of dollars. We were going to a baseball game, but he had to follow me. I turned around 3 times before I finally said, could you lead us out of this neighborhood? Needless to say, I did not get his money, but if you look at anyone, there's an area of cluelessness and there's an area of brilliance. And I think what happens often with people, and definitely with leaders, we have these blinders on for the stupid in people. When, I think it was Einstein that said, if you expected a fish to climb a tree, you would think he was stupid or didn't know what he was doing. Anyway, it's the same thing with people. Yeah, you're going to notice where they're stupid at. Right. Well, don't use them for those things, right? There is an area of brilliance in all of us, and leaders need to, and that's the nonlinear, in my opinion. And that's what we need to start focusing on, is looking for that area of brilliance. And oftentimes, and I think this is the beauty of it, people don't even see it in themselves. So as a leader, for you to be able to look at them and see it in them, wow, you have just motivated them beyond words. You have inspired them. You have engaged. I mean, tick all the boxes on what HR is looking for these days. You've done it because you looked for their brilliance and not for where they might look stupid.
Yeah. Well, it's allowing people to play to their strengths, but it's also, it's also in some ways calling them back to that, nonlinear 2 to 3 year old of self of, what are you good at? I'm really good at drawing trucks. I'm really good at but to being able to own the things you're good at and not without the attachment of what other people think or how it'll make you look. It's a lot about belonging. It's a lot about belonging, I think.
Sure. And when I used to coach individuals on an individual basis and not necessarily a company, and people did not know what their brilliance was or what they wanted to do with their lives, I would always tell them, think about the compliments that you get, or start to notice the compliments that you get where you go, oh, that's nothing. It's nothing because you do it so effortlessly, right? To that person, for them to compliment you on it, they probably can't do it, or it's very difficult for them to do it. So yeah, it's that non-linearity, that brilliance that you had, maybe you lost in, taking the linear path of the world, right?
Or just forgot about. I also coach people to when somebody thanks you for something, regardless of if it's a challenge for you or not, say you're welcome, because saying you're welcome allows you to take in that thanks and helps fill up your bucket. Whereas no problem, no big deal. No, then you're sort of taking their thank you and crumpling it up and throwing it in the corner. Yeah. And then nobody benefits. But it's really about that that energetic exchange also. So Any tips for our listeners on how they can reconnect to their nonlinearity?
Sure. Well, especially if they're leaders tuning in, start to have conversations with your team members and just get curious. Get curious about, what's working in their life, what's not working as far as their workday, what could be better, and watch, not just listen. Watch for what begins to light them up. When do they, sit with their shoulders back and their face lights up? I mean, their whole demeanor changes when even if they don't recognize it, when they connect with their own brilliance, because we all have it. And as leaders, you have the excellent opportunity of helping people tune into that and solve the unsolvable for your team.
Exactly. And in your experience, how does the Octopus Movement provide a safe space and supportive structures, useful structures, human-centered always, for unique thinkers and nonlinear folks, which is really everybody, to flourish?
Yeah. Well, gosh, my first interaction probably a year ago now, maybe less than a year ago, was in a think tank and a Meet the Octopi. And I don't know if it was because I was nonlinear and I just felt like, I'm home now, or the fact that everyone's accepted. Yes, you have quirks. Yes, you definitely aren't perfect, but hey, we're glad you're here. And we know that you have value to add, and come on in. I like that. That's sorely missing in many areas, not just work. Some families don't even have that. So it's just a perfect environment. And I think because of that, it's going to influence the world. It really is. Because if you think about it, if someone asked me, we're going to run over maybe, if someone asked me, well, what unsolvable have you solved? Well, first of all, if you know anything about innovation, you know that everything on this planet, beyond the planet itself and us, the people, was first a thought, right? This notepad somebody thought of first, this water bottle someone had a thought of, the roads, everything was a thought, right? Before it became to be. Mm-hmm. But at the Octopus Movement, what is the thought we want everyone to be thinking? That we together can create a sustainable future, right? So even if we do nothing beyond getting thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people to think about creating a sustainable future for us all, we have already succeeded beyond our wildest expectations.
What a great setup. That concludes our exciting episode of the Octopus Movement. Thank you, Karen, so much for sharing your wisdom and your experience.
I'm glad to be here.
And
thank you, Janice.
How can listeners get in touch with you?
Yes, LinkedIn. My LinkedIn profile is up, I think, or will be. Mm-hmm. And if not, designforinnovation.com is my website. You can go there and message me through there.
Great. All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us. If you have any questions about how you can join the movement, feel free to reach out to me, Dr. Janice Campbell, or Karen Zeigler here on LinkedIn, or you can visit theoctopusmovement.org. And remember, we all start out of the box. Embrace your inner octopus, join the movement, and let's bloom a sustainable future together. This is Janice Campbell of the Octopus Podcast, signing off until next time. Bye.